like to call to order the Ulster County Industrial Development Agency Governance Meeting at 1:01 p.m. on August 11th, 2023. I'd like to start with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, roll call. Diane Einen, present. Lynn Archer.
Here.
And Kostu Ball.
Present.
Thank you. All right, and just want to recognize we have Steve with us and are anticipating Rashida, board members who have been on the working group for housing. So thanks for being here with us today, Steve. All righty. Oh, good. All right. If you could take a few moments on page 3 and review the minutes from our governance meeting on June 14th, and then a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll make the motion to accept the minutes.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Public comment on agenda items only. There is no one out there. Okay. Executive session if necessary. It is unnecessary. So we will move to old business, which is the IDA housing policy review and recommendations. Essentially, the objective of our discussion today is we've established a working group to do research and help the governance committee think about the IDA housing policy and any recommendations and thoughts that they might have. So today is an opportunity for Steve and Rashida, when she's here, to give us kind of an overview or ideas about some of the thoughts, recommendations that you may have as a working group related to the housing policy. And then I'll also ask Councilor Joe Scott, who's done some great research for us on what some other counties have done, to also just give us a kind of overview. The objective here is to take this information and so that the governance committee can then continue to look at that information and other research that we've gathered to make it a recommendation to the full board of the IDA on our housing policy, since right now we have a moratorium on housing. So that's the overall objective of this discussion today. So Steve, you want to kick it off here?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Rashida and I have done a little bit of research on this. We have looked into kind of what's going on in the county. There is a a shortage of housing really at all levels, and I think you just unmuted him. Maybe he's muted. It's great, Joe, when you can't talk and then you just have to listen. I get the whole floor. It's fantastic when you're muted. Sorry. So as we approach this, we had some different.
Won't hear him.
No, Joe can hear him.
Okay. As we approach it, there's a number of different issues. We have an acute shortage of affordable housing, and we really have a shortage of housing at all levels. There's just what's happened is that there's not people aren't moving around as much as they did because the interest rates have risen. So since people with low interest rates are not selling their houses, they're staying put, which has created a housing shortage because there's no inventory for people to buy. They're on the more affordable side where it's more rental. There isn't enough of housing, and so that's driven up the costs really pretty dramatically. Houses that used to cost $1,000 has probably doubled in the last 4 years since COVID started, which is part of the whole inflationary spiral that we've seen as probably from the COVID epidemic and all that goes with that. And it doesn't seem to be coming down all that much, just like gasoline doesn't seem to be coming down either. It seems like it's going to stay, and prices tend to be sticky going up, they go up quickly and are sticky coming down. So I would not predict that we're going to see a huge reduction in the market until there's more housing available, so that supply and demand can work, because the supply is just tight. So um, I believe that all housing is good, and it creates a vacancy somewhere else in the market, and helps to address the demand. Um, my partner in this sees the higher priority for affordable housing, and I can certainly understand that. However, I think that from a policy standpoint, I would recommend that we not limit ourselves to any particular housing, and we look at every single opportunity that we can help with this as an opportunity that will create housing and help to address the demand, and creates holes, not holes, but creates opportunities for other people to buy houses. Um, so I would look at it that way. I think that market rate housing makes sense, as does affordable housing, which tends to be more apartment driven. I think we could investigate if somebody came with a proposal that they wanted to have a lot of tiny houses. I think that would be something we should look at. I think there's a lot of things. I don't think we should exclude anything in housing when we look at things we might want to finance.
So any thoughts, responses?
I do have a few thoughts. I had discussed with Steve earlier and Rashida as well last time
You're-
after the meeting briefly. Yes. Sorry. Yes, I do, and I should update you all as well. So first of all, I agree with what Steve is saying, and I don't know if it's a unanimous thought now, but to me, it's really about housing overall, not just affordable housing. I think affordable housing can be created if you do create some market price housing too. And you can incentivize or incentivize certain builders if that happens. The other thing I was thinking as I was reading this, the document that was shared, the Ulster County Industrial Development Agency 2023 Housing Research document, I do believe, Steve, that, and we can talk about it in detail, it's not just alternative forms of housing, perhaps tiny housing or ADUs as well. From what I have noticed, both looking at auctions that happened in the last 3 years or 4 years in Ulster County and others, there are some housing stocks perhaps which can be renovated as well. So it doesn't have to be new ground break, it could be something existing that can be reformatted. And the other question I have is, I noticed that there are a few structural hindrances like state and local restrictions. Is there a way to think about what can we do to perhaps alleviate some of those
Hi, Rashida.
restrictions, if those are restrictions per se? And if there's anything that we can't do just yet because it's a statewide or federal restriction, but if there is something we can do in the county or in partnership, we would do that. The last point that I wanted to inform everybody, that's why I was wondering if everybody will be here, I did have a conversation with a few folks who are affiliated with iPark 87, so Dan Hayhouse and a few others that you all know. I don't know how it's progressing, but they have decided for sure, as Mike Hammond mentioned, Chair, they're going with 800 some workforce solution housing. And it will take various formats of perhaps dormitory style or one bedroom or studio, etc. I think we need to think about that in conjunction with what our bigger objective is, as we talked about previously as well. So I think if we can think through those options and dynamics when we come across again in September, that'd be my recommendation, and that's what we should think about and the outcome.
Yeah, I just want to recognize Rashida is present. Hi, Rashida. Thanks for being with us. Just real briefly, objective for the governance committee is to hear your thoughts from the working group and Steve's. Steve's also shared some of his thoughts to begin with, and then we're going to hear from Joe Scott, who's done a good job of researching what other IDAs have done. So this is more about a meeting to help us, the committee, fully understand what other what other research and thoughts that have been emerging in your work. So I'm going to go to Lynn, though. She just had a question, some comments, then we'll come back and want to hear your thoughts about and recommendations for us.
Yes, thanks, Chair. A couple of things that I've been thinking about, and just from what I'm seeing in the marketplace, most new builds are over 500,000.
Yep.
And so that is not affordable to the average person in this community who's making anywhere from 30 to 60,000 in income. They can't afford that house. So when we look at where our greatest need may be, I do think it is at the workforce level. And affordable, again, we kind of throw that word out, but I think it's really important to define what we mean by affordable. The state has a definition, the feds have a definition. We kind of toss it around interchangeably with workforce. And, looking at mean salaries in this area, we are pricing out the workers we need for our funding our businesses, running our businesses, providing service in the community. So I think that is really where the biggest crunch has occurred. And so I think that with that thought in mind, I agree, all housing is good and important and it helps people move up. But I think our biggest issues, I've got people clamoring, constantly calling saying, I can't find a place to rent. I can't find a place to rent where it's not eating up half of my paycheck because rents have gone up. So there are some, I don't know that this housing piece is going to solve all of it, but, as areas gentrify, we, see this. So I do think there can be a balance, and I think that's what I'm hoping we can look at how we're going to incentivize, maybe starting small and then looking where we go. Because I think if it's market rate, I don't think we have a challenge there. If those houses still, some of them are sitting there longer now because interest rates have gone up and, the whole issue there. But I think but they're still building the 500 plus house. And it's more closer to 1 million in some cases.
I agree, and I would say one thing on that, however, I don't think it's about the high-priced houses as we talked about. The people who can afford are looking to
Right, they don't
build,
need to be
they don't need
incentivized.
to be incentivized
Right.
necessarily. However, the developers do need to be incentivized or disincentivized certain cases to promote the housing that others might need as well. So I think there has to be a balance between the two. There might be certain areas where a $500,000 house is being built or $1 million house is being built. The individual.
Sorry, could I just jump in for 1 second to make sure that, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, and I just want to make sure, and I apologize for interrupting, and it is a little awkward, obviously being on the phone. The housing that that I think we should be talking about is rental housing. We can't, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding some of the comments. We can't help Harry Smith construct an $800,000 house, on a 3-acre parcel in Ulster County. I think what we should be discussing and focusing on is rental housing across whatever continuum, however limited or broad, that you all think we should be involved in. And if I misunderstood some of the comments, then I apologize. But I just wanted to make sure that we weren't kind of drifting into single family owned residences or even condominiums. There are some things that we could do if you want to get into the condominium structure, but that raises a number of issues that I'm more than happy to go into. But I think what we should be talking about is rental housing at whatever level, broad or narrow, that the board wants to incentivize / assist. If I misunderstood some of the comments, I apologize.
No. Thank you, Joe. That's really very helpful. Lynn?
Just one follow-up to that, Joe, is I think we understand that we're talking housing in general and where we we should be focusing. And, there's to Steve's point, which I think is good, all housing is good. It's just what is really needed in our community. And there are going to be some opportunities. I know that the legislature has a housing team that they're looking to try and establish a housing committee that will take, and I know Kingston's already doing it, take houses that are being foreclosed on and incentivizing builders to rehab them and then selling them to workforce people at certain income levels to purchase. So I think, and is there a place for us in that? I don't know. All I'm saying is I think we're just looking at this juncture broadly and then figuring out how we zero in on what our focus should be.
If I could just, if you could hold that for one second, because Rashida's been trying to
Go
get
ahead.
in here and just want to make sure that we get her thoughts as well from the working committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stu.
So I didn't want to steal too much of your thunder, Joe, because I have been looking at different IDAs as well. So I looked at the Village of Green Island. I have a call in to Hudson. They still have to get back to me. And I also looked at the UTEP for Mount Vernon and for New Rochelle, and also the mission statement and work of the, again, Green Island IDA. So what I found is that some IDAs play a more direct role in housing than others. So, for example, Green Island was established in 1979, and they, with the village, acquired a parcel of land that was an abandoned Ford Motor manufacturing plant. And they partnered with the village to help bring and make it a prosperous industrial park. There's a part of it that's still undeveloped, and they're working with a private developer to develop market rate housing. So they have an active role in the acquisition and development. And then, so I provide links to their parcels.
Market rate rental or purchase?
They
Is it
don't
clear?
specify.
Okay.
So they don't specify on their website, but it might be worth calling to clarify. I'm gathering.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those projects because we don't do all of their projects, but we're their primary counsel. It's market rate rental housing.
Awesome.
Rental. Yep.
Right. And so Mount Vernon, they wove their housing policy into their UTEP. So they prioritize really public benefit. So projects, whether they're market rate or I'm recalling here, or affordable, but they have to have certain types of public benefits. So they differentiate, again, between market rate and affordable. And so I don't want to take up too much time by reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is,
By
no, this
reading-
is good. This
By
is
reading
good.
their pilot agreement. So for their pilot agreement, they state the agency's base policy provides for a graduated schedule of 35% real property tax abatement applicable to county, city, and district taxes with respect to residential housing other than affordable housing and non-residential commercial facility projects. Those projects meeting the requirements of low-income housing tax credit, the low-income housing tax credit program established by Section 42 of the IRS Code shall be eligible to receive a pilot that would be initially established at an amount equal to or at least less than 10% of the gross annual shelter rent. And then they go into a long description of shelter rent. So I linked to the UTEP so we can check that out and check the definitions ourselves. And so basically, it would increase over time, 2% over time, until it gets to the term of the pilot agreement. So notwithstanding the foregoing, the agency may, in its sole discretion, elect to provide a greater abatement not to exceed 45% of the full taxes. So they're basically starting it out low, a low taxation rate, and then increasing. Do I have that right, Joe?
Yes, that sounds, it's a fairly technical piece that you're reading.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a couple of different ways to structure pilot agreements for low-income housing. One is that 10% shelter rent formula. Another is a percentage of the otherwise
Thank you. And New Rochelle also, they have a similar housing policy, but like Mount Vernon, I do provide a link to their housing policy. They provide special benefits around things such as transit-oriented development, and other types of development that they would like to see more of, based on the needs of their community. And then the only really county-wide example that I found was Tompkins County. So they have
Tompkins.
Tompkins County. So they have a set aside for workforce housing in their UTIP, but they don't specify precisely how
What it is?
Yeah, exactly.
Defining workforce housing.
And
Is it an income driven? And Joe, maybe you have some experience with that.
Yes, and but again, it's what we're describing to, for purposes of the discussion is how these various IDAs have addressed issues. For instance, Tompkins, they've identified a lack of workforce housing as an issue, and they're going to incentivize that type of activity. Um, Apparently, they're not going to incentivize market rate housing. So it's really an issue of what you all around the table want to do from from a policy standpoint. And if we could step back for a second and look at the existing policy of the IDA that has been put on hold pursuant to the moratorium, is that we directly say we're going to do workforce housing, we directly say we're going to do CCRCs, and then we say we'll do anything else as long as the developer gets the consents of the county, the town, and the school district. So that's our current policy with respect to housing. So we've deferred and delegated, if you will, to the local taxing jurisdictions, decisions on whether a particular project is going to move forward, and that's similar to the approach that Dutchess takes. Across the river, I don't think they say consent, but I think they say letters of support from. So, and philosophically, there's upside and downside to that. I've heard some board members, not this board, but some board members have said, well, wait a minute, we were appointed by the governing body to make decisions on economic development and incentives, and why would we delegate that and let a town or a school hold us hostage with respect to something that we think is important? Others have said, well, wait a minute, we should delegate to them because they're the true parties in interest, they're the ones that are losing the tax revenue, and we should listen to them. So these are not easy issues, but what they are issues that people have to take positions on.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, you make a good point here, too, in that, at this point, there's a moratorium on our housing policy, obviously, to give us time to review, and we should keep our current policy also as an option. That's part of the work for the governance committee as well. So,
so I have
go ahead, Rashida.
one last, I was going to wrap up really quickly so I don't take too much time in. So my kind of recommendation, and I think, this is where I'm like not sure about how it would work out legally, and Joe, maybe you can give us some feedback, is that we should have a more like a flexible policy that prioritizes housing development, retention, and preservation, based on that which would provide the greatest benefit to Ulster County residents and businesses based on data. So specifically data from vetted sources such as the Ulster County Rental Housing Survey, which I printed out, but my printer ran out of ink, so it's available online. And that really shows it's not necessarily workforce housing; it's really affordable housing and housing at the level of 40% of AMI and below that's required, and that's what the data shows. And so, when we're relying on data, we're relying less so on our feeling or anything like that, but we're able to really see where the needs of the county are and how we can best serve them. And we can always circle back with the support that's right there. Other sources of data are New York State Homes and Community Renewal, and if you look at they're coming out with some really interesting data around housing growth because of the housing compact that failed to pass this year. So there's a lot of studies that are going to be coming forward around that. But then also HUD, and then the U.S. Census, the Consumer Price Index Housing Survey, the Federal Reserve Bank Housing Economics and Decision Making, or SHED survey, and then also the United Way ALICE reports.
Yeah.
So these are all like solidly.
Has Alice been updated?
It's
Because I think it was 2019 was the last. or
2022. They just
oh,
came
they
out.
did.
Yeah.
Okay, I missed that then.
Yeah, they
Okay.
just came out with.
It just
I saw
came out.
Yep.
Okay. I'll have to check that.
So that's kind of my 2 cents.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Rashida. And if you can send to Lisa the
Yeah.
links and whatever else, when Lisa, you can get that to the governance committee.
And I will say, all housing is good, but not all housing that's good needs to be helped by our dollars
Yeah.
From the IDA. And if you look at, there's a couple studies out right now from the Harvard Center for Housing Studies, and they show where the underproduction of housing is at, and particularly in that affordable category. So
Yeah. Thank you. That was
So
great.
it's affordable as defined
Fine.
By the HUD
state and federal. Yeah.
I just want to say a few.
Wanted to say something, and
But Steve, why don't you go ahead? So,
Well, having been an affordable housing developer and did 3 projects, uh, the key is that it has to be affordable. And when we're talking about pilots, I think we should be looking at realizing that whatever the tax is going to be passed straight through to the people we're trying to help. So I think we should reserve our right, which we have it, rather than delegate that to the taxing authorities who have a conflict, because they look at that as revenue to them. So it's like, if you have somebody who's going to get paid by something, then they have a conflict in that decision to some degree. And I think we should listen to their input, but we should not delegate the final decision, because after all, if we're really trying to have affordable housing, we can't have market rate taxes, and we can't have anything even close to that. So it doesn't achieve the goal that we're trying to accomplish. So I would not delegate that, the final authority. We should keep that. We have the ability to say there will be no taxes if we choose to, or whatever we say. And I think that will be very helpful in keeping the rents low, because they all have to be paid for by the people we're trying to help.
And I think if we were to take that approach, I think we would have to be very explicit that we actually would seek their input, because it does impact their pounds and etc. So I think we would have to be explicit about that and make a commitment to get that input. Not final approval, but certainly that is a good partner.
Of course. I just don't think we should delegate that and just say, well, how much taxes do you want? And
Yeah.
I think we should listen to them and get their input, and then come together and make our own decision as to what it should be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a precedent we would want to have. And we have this authority to grant pilots. We should not delegate that to anybody else.
Thank you. Costi, I know you wanted to
yeah, so
share some thoughts.
first I'll address what Steve is saying just now. I was thinking along the same lines, and just to add my support to that, and I think everybody's in agreement, it's not only about whether it's the town decision or a village decision. It's, in my opinion, not all towns are run equally well or poorly, whatever it might be. So the decision cannot sit with just one entity. It has to be directed to a certain extent with the local denizen approval and input, as you said, Diane. However, I think we might be getting a little too far before even setting some parameters down. To me, I don't think it's about
We're just trying to get some ideas. So.
No, I agree, but I
and
think
have
we have had a few.
conversation, yeah.
No, no, I agree. I would say, to me, it's not just about the dollar or the absolute value of the build. It's really, to me, about what size thresholds are needed. Is it a one bedroom we are talking about or two bedroom? Because when we get to the numbers that we were addressing earlier, $500,000 or $1 million, just as examples, I don't think those are relevant at this point because the affordability that we are talking about is not at that level. And it's not necessarily that we can say that let's incentivize something that's going to be a two-bedroom house. However, it could be priced at $500,000. So that's, I don't think we should be focusing on that debate. To me,
I
it's
don't
more
think
about.
we are.
I know.
I don't think we are at all.
That's what I heard earlier, that we were talking about dollar amounts. So to
I
me,
was,
it's-
it was just an example of builds that are occurring today are not the builds that are 100,000 or 150,000. The builds that are happening today are over 500,000. So when you talk about incentivizing, there's no need to incentivize that group. It's already happening.
No, that's what I'm saying.
What's
There's
not
no need
happening
to-
is at the lower end. So just for clarification.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. No, that's why I was saying as an example that we had used. To my point, I think it's more important to look at what size thresholds are needed and then decide, because that can change by the amount of money you want to spend on per square foot basis.
For that, I agree.
So,
And I think looking
just
at,
One thing. So if we are able to do that, at that point, Joe, I don't think it's only a matter of rental or a purchase property. I agree with the rental that would affect the change we want to bring sooner, perhaps. But it has to be thought through in a long-term basis as well, because the person or the entity that's developing it, they're not going to look at it from a present value of cash flows from rental only. They're going to look at the value of the build as well. So, and I can clarify, I'll stop because I know Rashida has to say something as well. But there's a lot more to it than simply saying if it's affordable or not. Because 33% spend per month on housing as defined currently may not be affordable to certain entities, right?
No, because that's the absolute threat. You shouldn't
That is-
have it,
well, I
right?
saw it somewhere on paper as well. So I don't think that should be the driving force. We should be thinking about what is needed now, and to achieve all the mission statement that we have, what can we build to achieve that in the next 5 to 10 years, or whatever the forecast period is for our projections, if you may.
So I was just going to go back to the data sources that we have, because they talk about the number of bedrooms that are required.
Right.
They talk about the affordability, and so I think it's all circles back to what we're saying around affordable housing, because if we look at the price of a one bedroom, if we look at the price of a studio, if we look at the price of a two bedroom, we can see the affordability levels, and we can see where we're losing population, and we're particularly the population that would go into our workforce, and so basically the affordability question answers kind of what you're saying. So if we're looking at affordable housing, it is providing the most that's most needed. And it would say, okay, well, a two-bedroom house or a two-bedroom apartment building. And when I'm saying rentals, I'm thinking multi-units, apartment buildings. So basically, my end of all of this is that we need to look at the data. We need to get in contact with Kai Farmer down in planning and look at the rental survey. We need to look at all this data, because that's going to tell us what's needed. We're sitting and we can speculate, but
I agree.
it's there.
I agree.
Yeah.
But the only thing I'd say, the data that we have in the report, I saw that one too. I think it's quite lagging. So we need current data that's applicable so that we can actually make the right decisions.
So the U.S. Census, the Consumer Price Index, the Federal Reserve Bank Survey, the Alice Survey, so these are all vetted sources, and they go beyond just
No, I was
the
talking specifically about Ulster County.
It's not the best, but it's I'm going to say it's a verifiable source of data.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The other thing I think we have to keep in mind in our discussions and eventually what policy we move forward with is that the IDA is here and our but-for clause. But for the IDA, this project would not get off the ground. And there's many housing projects that essentially could come to us, which is why we put a moratorium on here, that did not necessarily need the IDA. So it has to be imperative that it weren't for us, regardless of what the project is, that we are the only way in which this thing is going to get launched. So I just want us to keep that in mind as well as we're thinking about this.
No, completely agree that if it's needed, if the support is needed, and the board determines that, if it's not needed, then it shouldn't be. And so that's why the definitions need to be set.
So there are developers that specialize in affordable housing and also workforce housing, which is not the same.
Right.
Yes.
Workforce housing is really targeted towards higher income people, not high income people, but higher than affordable housing.
Mhm.
Affordable housing is really based on, which is the kind of projects that we did. I think having workforce housing around industrial areas to supply, to be able to have workers live close to where they work makes a lot of sense. I think part of the discussion here is about zoning, which is not really our purview, but I think it wouldn't be that hard for the planning department to give us maps that show zoning as to where this is where land
Where
is
it's
available.
doable,
Density.
yeah.
Mhm.
Where it's doable. And I don't think we should waste our time in trying to get zoning changed and do anything else. If there are places that are available,
Yep.
Mhm.
particularly if they're owned by governments that might want to access them,
Yep.
that's what we should be looking at. Because that way the land is basically free. And in this county right now, land is very expensive. That's a very expensive base cost. So we really want to accelerate affordable housing and workforce housing. I mean, workforce housing when it makes sense at the high park or around it. And the county owns property there. I mean, there's a lot of property that isn't part of the industrial park. That would be a great place to build affordable housing, particularly if the county's successful in growing out I-Park. If it isn't, then I don't think there'd be any reason to build any kind of housing there, because it's not really near anyplace else. So that I would say would be a contingency. But affordable housing really needs to also, the way that the state scores that is kind of an important thing to understand, because we might be part of a financing package that included the division of housing and other tax credits, like new markets tax credits. And so when you say but for, we may be the last dollar to make it work, but we won't be the only one.
No, I agree. And we've had projects that, they've done all that. I mean, that's the work of the project, to find out where the zoning, where there's opportunity, other sources that would support them through the state or the county. I mean, there's at federal level, we've had those projects, and we are the missing piece. So we've had that as well in some of the projects that have become before us. But that's their work of the project, to do the research and understand what that is.
When someone is having done this, each one of our projects had an application to the Division of Housing that is about 8 inches. It's a giant binder. And it included archaeological digs and all kinds of stuff. And they're very interested in proximity to being able to shop.
Transportation.
Transit, yeah.
And so you really, when we look at our generally a
Yeah.
pretty rural county, there isn't, there's hamlets that might be good places for affordable housing, but that's probably it. You have to be around a community. They're not likely to be out in Shandaken, and no disrespect to Shandaken, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's not a place that would lend itself well to this.
Doesn't have a lot of local services, right?
does not.
Yeah.
Services, access, yeah.
Transportation.
Transportation.
The 209 corridor has
That's right.
bus transportation, and there's, I think, a little opportunity there. I don't know if it's been fully explored.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly, I would like to build more in my professional life, outside of this scope, build more affordable housing. I really think that there is a need for it. And I think, but I Ulster County, and maybe some of the other municipalities that are interested in doing this. Once we have an executive director on board here to be able to do some of this work for us, I would suggest that we would reach out to all of the towns and villages and gauge their appetite for affordable housing and workforce housing. And some of them are not going to be interested, so let's not waste our time on those. Let's look where we can make some quick base hits here and get some projects started. Ideally where there's land that could be accessed for this purpose, and say that's going to be available to the developer that gives us the proposal we like the best. And then that would make it very affordable for them to get into it, because they would not have to pay for the land.
And I
Or it would
think
be a real reduced cost.
I'd agree, Steve. I think there are few towns, if you may, like town of Rochester and a few others. They're already looking at ADUs as making that available for affordable or not housing, basically. So I think there might be. Is there a bank where we can access information on what is readily available with respect to access to the government that we already own, or that's
Your
also-
towns would know that.
The
To the
towns-
point
It's on
that
a town
Steve-
by town
town
basis?
would know, yeah.
And I think the county could be asked also, because the
County has some of that as
some
well.
property as well that's
Yeah.
spread around. And Dennis Doyle will probably know
That's
that
right.
off the top of his
Mhm.
head, you guys.
That's right.
That's a walking encyclopedia. So I mean, I think that would be obvious first step and to tell them, well, we've got money that we could, and benefits that we could use to apply to make this happen. And developers, there's a number of developers in the Hudson Valley that specialize in this, and it isn't very hard to find them. I know a lot of them. You got Rupco here, Ulster County. You've got Jonah Mandelbaum in Orange County, who's done a lot of work here also. You've got Keith Leibold, who does a lot of projects. I mean, those are three reputable developers right off the top of my head, and I'm sure there probably is others. So,
I think one other thing we should pay attention to is size and scope of project. So, if you're trying to build, 40 units or less, it's really difficult, because you don't get a lot of subsidies at that level. And so market rate housing tends to be on the lower scale because it can get built faster. A lot of affordable housing units will take 3 to 5 years to build, and then they need to be above 40 units, particularly outside of New York City. So I'm thinking of that last dollar and not getting built but for, and really paying attention to projects that wouldn't qualify for other types of tax credits or other types of things, even though they're affordable, because they don't have that many units. So you could have, a entity that wants to build 15 units on its parcel, and they don't have, they won't have the benefit of the tax credits or loans or anything. So I think our kind of we'd have a greater impact at that level as well.
So Rashida, I can help you think through that because something similar. I can't remember the second one, but there was J51 abatement, and I think J25 or 21 abatement
Okay.
that was done in certain parts of New York City and outside as well.
You mean
right
421A?
Maybe.
421A.
Maybe there was 25 as well, but
Okay.
one was set for certain less than a decade. The other was set for about 25-year time period.
Mhm.
And they also devised a faction that a certain percentage will be dedicated to
Mhm.
as affordable housing, if you may or not.
Mhm.
But the phasing out of the tax benefits was at different intervals and periods. So I think
Okay.
there are a few things that we can consider from that standpoint as well.
Mm. Yeah.
Joe, at this point, any comments, any thoughts that might help us as we move forward?
Yes, and sorry, I'm a little slow on the mute button. The one concept that hasn't been addressed is that you may find helpful as you think about how to put something together, and that is the so-called criticism of, and it actually ties into a little bit, Diane, your but for point, which was a very good one, and that is having a finance professional on the part of the IDA review the pro forma of the developer to confirm or to investigate what the rate of return is on the matter, so that you can feel confident that the pilot structure is in fact necessary for the undertaking of the project, and it also puts you in a position to rebuff what sometimes is a criticism from the media and or the naysayers that that these pilot transactions are unduly enriching the developer. So that's something that you might want to think about. And several of our more involved / sophisticated IDA clients have a finance person on staff, and they also reach out to a third party analyst to review the numbers to make sure that they all make sense and are supportable. So that might be something that you add to the mix here.
Yeah, Joe, I appreciate that because, again, looking at some past applications that have been rather complex, and the entity that's applying is part of a variety of other groups and entities and businesses, it's often very difficult to get at that. And I think that's a really great point and an important one moving forward. Thank you. Anything else?
Can I ask a
Oh, yeah,
question
sure.
of Joe? Joe, as we know, some towns have parcels that, if they were interested in creating a project in their town, and were willing to include land as part of that, have you had any experiences with, is it a lease, is it a transfer, is it a sale to the developer as part of the project? How to structure something like that, because I think if we're going to think about it that way, what would be the implications or considerations in a policy that could potentially give us flexibility, so if somebody wanted to do that, we're not tied into just a formula, but to provide the right level of incentive to the developer and the town who's willing to make a decision like that.
Sure, we've worked with municipalities to either have the property inventoried or stockpiled by the IDA, and the IDA holds it, and then either conveys it or leases it. We typically like a conveyance because it gets the IDA out of the deal, and we try to minimize the liability of the IDA for any long-term, period. But
Is that a short-term conveyance?
the options there.
Is that a short-term conveyance or a longer term? It's like getting them to the build stage and then ensuring that they're meeting all the conditions before we convey? Is that what you're referring to?
No, well, I don't think that
No, I didn't think so.
anyone would be willing to do that.
Yeah.
In terms of build a building and then it still could be pulled back from them at the end. I think
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
do is we can certainly layer in conditions on the incentives, and we do that in the normal course with our straight lease deals where we have a clawback agreement, right? So, but what I think to protect the IDA and the municipality, we would just have very strong agreements, and then there'd be default, so that the project falls apart, if you will,
Right.
if they don't do what they said they were going to do.
Okay.
Just
So-
one. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So Joe, just quickly, because I know we're at 12:55, and you have to
Yep. We all
So-
have, a number of us have.
yeah, we all have a hard stop. So around workforce housing, have you encountered any entities or municipalities that also have affordable affordability requirements around the word workforce, the definition of workforce housing. Because as Lynn was saying earlier, we get to affordable workforce, these are kind of amorphous terms. Are there any types of financial or formulas or anything that municipalities use to define them?
I haven't seen anything directly with a numerical, an income approach, if you will, with respect to workforce. I've seen, kind of a general subjective term of, is intended to be used for, this demographic, if you will, and have, a fairly broad range so that you don't create a tripwire. Um, so that's really what I've seen, but I haven't, to be honest, Rashid, I haven't seen the low
That's gonna be
income
a challenge, yeah.
market there's a more definition of what the income ranges are and what the market sees for affordable, or I'm sorry, for low income / affordable. Um, for instance, the city of Albany just recently, as part of their zoning and planning approval, they have a low income / affordable definition, and they also impose on any developer building a site, and I think you've got something similar in Kingston, and with more than X number of units, they have to have a certain set aside
Percentage.
of low
Gotcha.
income /
Yeah.
affordable units.
But that's a moving target too.
Gotcha.
As we've seen.
And I just wanted, at this point too, we're 3 minutes in and we also have to run the next meeting, so, and I know some folks have to leave, but just really quickly before we adjourn, Kestu, I
I
think.
can ask him later.
Okay, all right. Steve?
I think the New York State Division of Housing has
Yes.
definitions of what is considered affordable for every county. So I think that we can get that. I think that's already done.
Yeah.
So
I think planning would have
Steve, I
that.
would agree with you on that.
Planning would
The
have
issue, I
that.
think,
Planning would have
Rashid,
that,
is,
yeah.
what's the
Dennis
definition
has
of
that.
workforce?
Yeah, I think we can get
Yeah.
that from
More
him.
subjective, I think.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think
great.
workforce, there may be definitions also. I just don't know where to get them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank Rashida and Steve for joining us today. Clearly, you guys have given this a lot of thought, have done some research, and the governance committee much appreciates that. And I'm sure we'll be circling back. And Rashida, again, if you could share whatever you have with Lisa so she could get out to the committee. And thank you, Joe, for being here. Very helpful. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And for his research.
Yeah, and for your research as well, yes. At this, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have a good day.
You too, take care.
Bye.
Thanks,
You too.
Lisa. We're Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Ulster County Capital Resource Corporation Governance Committee meeting on August 11th, 2023, and the time is 1 p.m. Roll call, Diane Einen present, Lynn
Here.
Costu.
Here.
Thank you. If you would refer to page 3, the minutes from our June 14th meeting, take a few seconds to review and a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll move the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Public comment on agenda items only. There are none, thank you. Executive session, if necessary, it's unnecessary. Old business, the IDA housing policy review and recommendations. Please let the minutes reflect the discussion that happened during the IDA meeting. Anyone have anything to add?
Nope.
Thank you. All right, no new business, and if I could have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.